If you have bipolar disorder, you might be confused about the difference between hypomania and mania. I used to be confused about this too. You might have been told that mania is more severe and that it lasts a week or longer. But what does that mean? What is considered more severe? And when does hypomania cross the line into mania? If you're confused and want to understand the difference, I'm going to explain this in a way that actually makes sense. I'm Patty, the girl with blue energy. I have bipolar disorder and I make videos about mental health and personal growth. My doctors never really explained the difference between hypomania and mania. So for years, I thought that mania was just longer than hypomania. So if I had a hypomanic episode that lasted longer than a week, I thought it was mania. I've even seen professionals explain it this way, that hypomania lasts 4 days and mania lasts 7 days or longer. But a long hypomanic episode does not automatically meet the criteria to be called a manic episode. So let's go over the symptoms of both and what actually makes them different. There are specific criteria in the DSM-5 for diagnosing hypomania and mania. The first part of the criteria explains what you need to experience in order for it to be considered a mood episode, either a hypomanic episode or a manic episode. With both hypomania and mania, you will see an elevated or irritable mood and an increase in energy. With hypomania, this will last at least 4 days, and with mania, it will last at least 7 days. Notice this change in mood and energy must be present most of the day, nearly every day. So these symptoms don't come and go, they are persistent. The second part of the criteria explains what symptoms you must experience during this time period. So these are the symptoms, and at least 3 of them must be present during the episode, or 4 if your mood is only irritable. Inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, more talkative than usual or pressure to keep talking, flight of ideas or subjective feeling of racing thoughts, distractibility as reported or observed, increase in goal-directed activity or psychomotor agitation, excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. If you meet the criteria for a mood episode and you have at least 3 of these symptoms, the mood episode is then categorized as either hypomania or mania, depending on its length and severity. So the main difference is not just the length of the episode, but the severity. Hypomania causes a change in functioning, but the symptoms are not so severe that they significantly impair social or occupational functioning. Mania, on the other hand, is severe enough to significantly impair social or occupational functioning, require hospitalization, or involve psychotic features. So that was the symptoms and diagnostic criteria for a hypomanic or manic episode. But you might be wondering which type of bipolar disorder is associated with hypomania and which is associated with mania. If you're not sure what bipolar 1 and 2 are, check out my video on how to tell the difference between the two. Hypomania can happen with bipolar 1 or 2. But mania, and some people call this full mania or a full manic episode, only happens with bipolar 1. And you only need to have 1 manic episode in your lifetime to be diagnosed with bipolar 1. I've explained the difference between hypomania and mania, and I've gone over the diagnostic criteria. Even if you know the symptoms and diagnostic criteria, it can still be confusing and hard to tell what's hypomania and what's mania. So I'm going to give you some examples. Let's start with hypomania. Hypomania can come across as being in a really good mood, having extra energy, or feeling motivated or productive. Some ways you can tell that it's hypomania is because you will notice a change in your sleep. So you may be waking up earlier or not falling asleep at night because your brain just won't slow down or shut down. And this isn't just a one-off good mood, good day, good energy. It's something that is noticeably different than your norm or baseline. You experience it over the course of at least 4 days, and people around you will likely pick up on your energy being up, and they may even comment on it. So here are a few examples of hypomania. Some of these are my own, and some are from people I know. So the first one is you wake up 2 hours early, all excited. You download an app and you're going to learn a new language, and you work on this obsessively, enthusiastically for 4 days straight. Or you can't fall asleep at night. You feel like a kid before Christmas. You've got all this energy and you want it to be tomorrow so you can work on getting your house all cleaned or meal prepping for the next 2 weeks or whatever project you want to work on. You go to work with all this energy and you're laughing about everything because everything is hilarious. You're funny, they're funny, you're bubbly, and can't stop talking. And then your coworker says, "How many energy drinks have you had today?" Now let's talk about mania. Everyone has a different experience when it comes to mania. These are a few examples from my life and from other people I know who have bipolar disorder. There are two big things I normally notice when I'm manic. The first one is I have a noticeable change in my sleep. And for me, that's a big, huge, noticeable difference. I can go several days without sleep when I get manic, and not just that I don't need it. I couldn't sleep if I tried. The second thing I notice is this feeling of adrenaline rushing through me. It's like my brain is racing. It's sort of like that feeling you get when you think someone's breaking into your house and your heart starts thumping. It's that kind of feeling, and it will be really intense, and I will feel that feeling through a large part of my manic episode. My worst manic episodes have involved psychosis, and I had auditory hallucinations during this time, and I also experienced serious paranoia. I remember sitting in my therapist's office telling him that someone was sitting in the room with us watching me, and I've never felt quite that manic since that time period, but it was pretty scary at the time. I have a friend who started making phone calls to everyone, thinking she could call the president and other VIPs. And then one night, she took a chainsaw to her dining room table so they could all have an authentic Japanese dinner. Now let's talk about why differentiating hypomania versus mania is so confusing. First of all, the diagnostic criteria is remarkably similar, which is why even the experts sometimes struggle to tell them apart. And then there are the oversimplified explanations, which is why many of us have heard hypomania lasts 4 days and mania lasts 7, and hypomania is milder and mania is more severe. And then there are the people who use the words interchangeably. I have seen this in recent articles. So on big publications, I saw an article talking about people's mania experiences, and one of them said they had bipolar 2. Well, if you know about bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, you know they don't have manic episodes. They have hypomanic episodes. So you see people using the terms interchangeably everywhere, saying manic instead of hypomanic. And determining severity of an episode is also difficult. Before I made this video, I looked high and low and read through the DSM-5 for myself on the criteria, and nowhere in there did it spell out in clear, concrete letters that this is when it's considered severe. It said severe enough to impair social or occupational functioning or require hospitalization. But it wasn't like this is the line in the sand and you've now crossed it and this is mania. There are a few ways that doctors determine the severity of a mood episode. One of the ways they check is through using screening tools. So they have questionnaires, and if you have bipolar disorder, you may have answered these before. They have questionnaires like the Rapid Mood Screener that screens for bipolar disorder and depression. They have a mood disorder questionnaire that helps to screen for manic or hypomanic episodes throughout your lifetime. They have a hypomanic checklist, and this checklist was designed to screen specifically for hypomania, although it can be used for mania as well. But it is better at screening for hypomania than some of the other questionnaires and screening tools. And there is another tool called the Young Manic Rating Scale, and this one is used to determine the severity of a manic episode. So it's a questionnaire that's filled out with the patient and the clinician. So they're getting both the patient's subjective information and the clinician's observed information. So your doctor may use one of these screening tools, or they may just evaluate you by talking to you and observing your behavior. And then they may decide if it's mania based on if you've been hospitalized, if you're having psychosis, how your sleep is, are you sleeping at all, what your manic or hypomanic behavior looks like, is it affecting your relationships, your work, are you doing risky behavior that could be really dangerous or bad for you. Those are the kind of things they're going to look at, and then they're going to determine the severity of your episode based on your behavior and how long you've been in this manic episode. You may or may not be surprised to hear that there is debate about our current diagnostic criteria for hypomania and mania. Even among experts, there's debate about what should be considered hypomania and what should be considered mania. An article published in the 2018 Australian and New Zealand Journal of Psychiatry discussed creating new diagnostic criteria for better diagnosing bipolar disorder. One of the main issues they discussed was how hypomania and mania were differentiated and diagnosed. And what was interesting to me is that some of their criticism was the same criticism I have, and also explains why so many of us are confused about what's hypomania and what's mania. One of the things the article pointed out was that the diagnostic criteria for hypomania and mania are actually very similar. In fact, the authors said the diagnostic criteria was virtually identical except for a difference in duration. Right now, the DSM says that hypomania has to last at least 4 days and mania has to last at least 7 days unless someone is hospitalized. But the article discussed research showing that some people have shorter hypomanic or manic episodes that technically don't meet the DSM criteria. In one study of clinically diagnosed bipolar patients, researchers found that many of them had never had an episode long enough to meet the DSM's criteria. In fact, nearly 46% of the bipolar 1 patients had never experienced a manic episode that lasted a week. And 44% of the bipolar 2 patients had never experienced a hypomanic episode that lasted 4 days. The article went on to discuss how severity is determined and how much of the criteria is still unclear. So the article discussed how much of determining severity comes down to occupational functioning, marked impairment, hospitalization, or psychosis. The authors argued that this is hard to determine because there is no precise definition of what marked impairment means. Mental health professionals end up making judgment calls based on either their observations, if we happen to be hypomanic or manic around them, or our reporting of our experience, which is not always accurate, especially if we're talking to you about our manic episodes. We may see it differently, we may downplay it, but you're relying on information that's coming from someone who may have had their judgment impaired during this time period. They also talked about hospitalization. So they argued that you can be hospitalized and it doesn't necessarily mean you're having mania. You could be having hypomania and end up hospitalized, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your diagnosis should be mania. They also argued that not being hospitalized doesn't mean it was hypomania, because sometimes there are situations like you don't have access to healthcare, or your location, or your personal circumstances. And I've known plenty of people who have had full-fledged manic episodes who aren't hospitalized. So it can happen, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have mania. So one of the things this article really pointed out was that diagnosis of hypomania and mania can be tricky, even for professionals. So while I think there is some clear understanding on the difference between hypomania and mania, it is understandable why it can be confusing. I hope you found this video informative. If you liked it, please click the like button and support my channel. And of course, subscribe. I'll have another video for you guys real soon.